Commonwealth's attorneys and I have concluded that the NCAA sanctions were overreaching and unlawful.
Someone's got to develop a product that you and I as a consumer are going to want to buy.
The country needs a comprehensive energy plan.
Hello and welcome to another edition of WHVL's For the Record. Our guest today is Mike Dawson from the Central Daily Times. Mike, you've had a very busy week, starting with Monday with the preliminary hearing of former Penn State President Graham Spanier and Administrator Gary Schultz, and also the Athletic Director Tim Curley. Let's talk about how, first of all, you were able to get into the courtroom. Did you have to go through some sort of pool to be able to get into this, sit down and watch the proceedings?
And Steve, no, this time there was no pool. It was just be there, get in line, go through security. And so they had some of the seats reserved for reporters, and then they had, I think, half the courtroom reserved for the general public. There, of course, were a lot more reporters than there were people in the public for this one. The Sandusky case, I think, had a lot more general public, really interested in it. This case, not so much.
And this is really the Penn State trial now, as opposed to what the Sandusky trial was.
It is. When you look at the people who are involved and the witnesses who will be called, I mean, it's a lot of Penn State employees. So, I mean, I think that the perception is, yeah, this is Penn State. Old Main is on trial or heading toward trial.
Now, when you went into to the courtroom, were you allowed to take any electronic devices with you and do any activity during the proceedings?
Yeah, we had a number of limitations and restrictions that were put upon us, and we've been subject to these for the past year and a half, as long as these cases have gone on. For this one, we were allowed to take in laptop computers and tablet computers, and but we were not allowed to, send our notes to a reporter, type out a story, and send it on. So we couldn't transmit live. That was the wording for that. So we couldn't tweet.
Okay.
No, we couldn't do anything like that, and cell phones had to be turned off. So you couldn't send a text message or even say, "Hey, how are the kids?"
Sure.
Nothing like that.
Now, was there, and this is the part that fascinates me, with all of the media were you in one general area?
For the most part, yeah.
And did that make it easier for security to keep an eye on everybody that way?
I think it did. I mean, I think that the security involved, I mean, it's gone between Bellefonte, or the Center County Courthouse,
Sure,
and the Dauphin County Courthouse. And you have the court administration from both counties. You have the sheriff's offices from both counties, and then the Newspaper Association and the Broadcasters Association. I think they know who the people are by this time, who they're dealing with. So I think they know our Twitter handles. They know who's in the courtroom writing the story. So if they see anything, yeah, they're going to know. You'll be caught.
Now, Center County saw an overwhelming coverage during the Jerry Sandusky trial. Did you see that same level in the Dauphin County Courthouse as well?
I didn't see. I saw a lot of the same reporters that I've seen, throughout this, but we didn't have, from what I can tell, the New York Times, some of the more national media reporters. CNN was there. They came for the second day. So there were some of that. But I think that as we get closer to trial, and especially if we hear that someone, let's say Mike McQueary will testify or Cynthia Baldwin, I think then you'll see those people, or the national media turn out, and certainly for a verdict if and when it gets that far.
Now, I'm not up on a lot of law procedures that go on in court. This was all presentments by the prosecution, correct? There really wasn't a defense
right.
motion.
For a preliminary hearing, the burden is on the prosecution. In this case, the prosecution is the Attorney General's office. And so they present witnesses, they present other evidence to support the charges that they've lobbied against the defendants. And so the defense can present witnesses if they want, but typically they kind of sit back and they try to cast some doubt, but the burden is so low in this case, and that means that they just have to show that a crime was committed and that it can reasonably be linked to these people, and that's enough to send it on.
Now, you mentioned the Attorney General's office is overseeing this. Kathleen Kane, was she a part of the proceedings down there?
She was not in the courtroom for these proceedings.
Okay, and we're going to get to her, not to interrupt you, we're going to get to you, get to her about your interview with her later on. So she has someone in particular that's handling this case, much like Linda Kelly had with the Sandusky prosecution.
Yeah, she's overseeing the case, and her lead prosecutor on the case, his name is Bruce Beamer. He was on the case when it was under the administration of Linda Kelly. So there's been some continuity in the case, and I think that, she's going to sign off on everything. So she's, directing it and making sure that it goes the way that she wants it to. And she's entrusting him to do all the arguing and, making the motions and handling it in court.
Now, with 3 different defendants at this one preliminary hearing, does each one of the gentlemen have their own attorneys representing them?
They do. They do. They have 3 different tables. The defendant sitting there with his attorney, and some of them have more than one attorney, all crowded in around this table. And so the way that it works, it's a little longer than, say a DUI trial if there's just one defendant. So the prosecution in this, for the preliminary hearing, they called a witness, and the prosecution, they asked, the questions that they wanted to, and then each defense attorney got a chance to cross-examine the witness. So it made it a little longer.
Sure.
Yeah.
And let's talk about some of the people that were,
Sure.
were witnesses there, because one of the first ones was Mike McQueary,
Yes.
and he was
Yeah.
on Monday, correct?
Yeah, he was the first witness called on Monday, and I mean, we've heard his testimony before. He's testified at the preliminary hearing in this case for different charges.
Sure.
A year and a half ago, he testified at the Sandusky trial, and I bet you're going to ask me what
No.
new development he.
No, what I was going
right?
to say was, how many times have you heard him give the testimony?
I've heard him testify now 3 times.
Okay, and have you seen the consistent story throughout all 3?
I think the crux of the story has been the same. I mean, you could look at little details here and there that might be, maybe he's calling it molestation now, and he called it something different before. But I think the English language is great because we have so many synonyms for our words. But one thing that changed was the timing of when he made his report, when he called Joe Paterno that Saturday morning after he saw what he saw in the Lash building. So he said it was 8 a.m. He said on Monday it was 8 a.m. At the trial, he said it was 7 or 7:15. At the preliminary hearing, I think it was 7:30, 8 o'clock. So I mean, I don't know that that's a huge deal, but I think that it's something that certain people, and there are people who love and hate Mike McQueary, and they can certainly latch on to details such as those if they want to, cast doubt upon him.
That's a good natural spot to stop, Mike. When we come back, we'll talk more with Mike Dawson from the Cincinnati Times. You're watching WHVL's For the Record. Back with more right after this. And welcome back to For the Record. We're talking with Mike Dawson from the Cincinnati Times. Mike, we stopped with the McQueary testimony, and in his testimony, he used Joe Paterno's name, and then he used the phrase, "Old Main screwed this up." What was the response, not just when he said it, but also afterwards in the press conference afterwards from attorneys and also from your fellow members of the media? What was that response like?
Sure. Well, I think inside the courtroom, I didn't get a really good handle. I wasn't in a position to see what Graham Spanier, how he reacted.
Sure.
But I think, I look back and I told my coworker, we had 2 people there, and it was his job at that point to take notes on Mike McQueary. And I said, oh, there's your lead, and the lead in the news business is the first sentence of the story. And I think that's even though that was one sentence out of, what ended up being 2 days of testimony, I think that's the thing that strikes people the most, because Joe Paterno's role, or whether he did or did not do enough in this whole, Sandusky incident, I think that there's still a lot of people out there who want answers and don't feel like they have the answers. So that drives conflict, right? The conflict drives a story.
Right.
So
in the post hearing that day, what was the response from the defense attorneys who, by the way, wouldn't take questions if I saw that correctly? They were just making blanket statements.
Well, the defense attorneys used that insight from Mike McQueary to say, hey, we haven't heard this before. Why is he bringing it up now? And so I think Caroline Roberto, who's representing Tim Curley, said that Mike McQueary changes his story, every time we hear from him. So I think that what that does is it gives you a very strong indication that they're looking to annihilate his credibility when he would take the witness stand at the trial.
So based on hearing the testimony 3 different times that you've heard it, how is it as a writer that this is the first indication he's given in his testimony about that kind of response from he and Coach Paterno?
Yeah, this is the first time I've heard it, and I was really looking at Mike McQueary's testimony thinking, okay, we've already heard this before. How are we going to write it in a different way? Or, I think we need to give it the context that this isn't earth-shattering because we've heard it before, and then he dropped that on us. So I think that just through everything, it changed the rules, and okay, this is what we have to say. But I think the one thing to remember, he's saying that this is what Joe Paterno told him. And so it turns into this, he said that, Joe said that,
Sure.
so and I don't even know that that'll be admissible at trial. Who knows?
Well, I was going to fall back on my SVU watching on Law and Order, and say that might be hearsay, in some people's minds. And certainly I think the whole trial, do you think the whole trial is going to, or at least the majority of the trial is going to hedge on how the defense can go after Mike McQueary's testimony?
I think that'll be a very central part of it, because I think they want to pick apart the moments, after he made the report and then the next morning, and just see if there were people that he told, because one of the defense attorneys wasn't allowed to ask who else he may have told, because Mike McQueary thought he may have called his long-term girlfriend at the time, and the defense attorney knew her name, and then the prosecutor objected, like Law and Order, objection.
Right,
and
sure.
They weren't allowed to go that far, because I don't think it wasn't relevant for a preliminary hearing. Now at the trial, it may be a different case.
Well, and that, the next thing I was going to ask you was, do you see his father and Dr. John Dranoff being witnesses now in the trial as it takes place?
That's a good question. I wondered if we would see John McQueary Sr., who was Mike's father. I wondered if we'd see him at the preliminary hearing, and he wasn't there. So I don't know. I think we might, but then you have to think about what his testimony is going to add, or how it will support the charges. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. However, John McQueary at the trial didn't remember testifying at the previous Curley Schultz preliminary hearing. So whether that hurts him or not, I don't know. So they may think that maybe he's a risk,
right,
and they don't want to put him on.
One of the new names that was witnessed this time was Lisa Powers,
yes.
and her involvement. She worked for the university, and what was her testimony based on?
So Lisa Powers, and she's Penn State's top spokeswoman. I mean, we write her name a lot of times, throughout the week regarding Penn State stories, and she testified essentially that she was kept out of the loop in Sandusky-related issues that started in September 2010, and then kind of, I think ebbed and flowed a little bit leading up to the whenever the presentment was released. And so her testimony, I think, showed that there was, or I don't know if it showed, or at least they were trying to support the fact that
right,
that the people in Old Main were trying to keep a really tight grip on the information, and they didn't want it to get out, and they didn't even think that Lisa Powers, who was the public information director, wasn't on a need-to-know basis for that information.
That goes to the conspiracy of silence quote that was used by, was it?
That was Linda Kelly's
okay,
quote, yeah.
Okay. Now, was Cynthia Baldwin involved in this hearing at all?
No, she was not called to testify, and her whole role in all of this is been under scrutiny by the defense attorneys. And so from what we were told by the Attorney General on Wednesday when we met with her, she said there'll be a hearing in October in which the defense attorneys and then the prosecutors will argue different motions and make their statements about whether or not Cynthia Baldwin can be called as a witness or cannot.
Was President Erickson involved in this at all?
He was not there. No, he was not there at all.
Interesting. Now, there were 2 days of testimony. The gentleman, no one is in prison though, correct? They've been arraigned and now they're out on bail.
Right.
Correct?
They've been released on unsecured bail, and so essentially what unsecured bail means, that's you're released and you don't, as long as you show up, you're not going to be arrested, or they won't issue a warrant for your arrest. And so if you are released on unsecured bail in Center County, you don't get fingerprinted, you don't go to the booking center, you're freed right away.
Now, do we have a date set now for the actual trial to take place?
No, there's not a date set yet, and I think that we've seen this trial, or this case, kind of proceed very slowly because of previous defense motions. I'd be surprised if the first trial date actually goes through. That could be scheduled for January, and then they may send it back to March or April. I think whenever it is, it's certainly, I think, going to be a couple weeks long, just because the nature of the case. I mean, the details that are going to have to be explored, and I mean, you have 3 defense attorneys too who can present their cases. I think we're in for a long trial.
Right, and if Cynthia Baldwin has to be discussed in October, there's another wrinkle, correct?
That could definitely be a wrinkle, but that's something that I think they'll want to take care of well in advance, and so she won't be an issue by the time they get to trial.
That's a good stopping point for us. We'll be back with Mike Dawson from the Saturday Night Times on For the Record right after this. And welcome back to For the Record. Our guest is Mike Dawson from the Saturday Night Times. Mike, let's get back to the trial a little bit. It only lasted 2 days. Was it going to last? I heard that it could have lasted 3, correct?
They set aside 3 days for it. So they actually set aside Thursday, August 1st as a day if necessary.
Okay.
They didn't need it.
Great. Now, did you see Greta Van Susteren or Nancy Grace at this trial, or do you see them coming because it's not as big of an, is perjury as exciting to cover as child molesting?
Well, I don't know. Maybe it depends on Nancy Grace's schedule, but you know, she is a prosecutor, or was a prosecutor,
right.
So I don't know. But I think that this case will be of substantial interest to the Penn State community just because it involves the heart of, you know, the free report. Even though the free report's not, I mean, the prosecution's not going to be up there picking or defending the free report, but the emails and other conclusions that were in the free report are essentially going to be part of this trial. So I think that, you know, you can say that all of Center County will want to know. I think, you know, people in Harrisburg, people in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. I don't know. I think, you know, outside of our state, I don't know. I'd be interested to kind of see. I do take a look at, you know, the Washington Post, New York Times, and try to see where their coverage is, and it hasn't risen to the level of the Sandusky trial, or at least those, you know, those hallmark days of the Sandusky trial.
Now, with the trial taking place in Dauphin County in Harrisburg as opposed to up here, have you seen that same sort of outrage that you saw here in Center County? Because it's not right in the backyard.
Yeah, I haven't seen that as much. I mean, when we were outside the courthouse on Tuesday afternoon finishing up our things, people came up and asked us, you know, why were all these TV trucks parked outside the courthouse? They didn't know. And I think that if that were in Center County, people would have known,
sure.
You know, because we're a lot smaller than Dauphin County. And I think that because the charges, you know, they're not as, you know, child abuse. I mean, that's a heinous crime, to quote your SVU.
Sure.
Perjury, these are, you know, certainly serious, but they're definitely way more detailed, and certainly the cases are detailed.
Now, Kathleen Kane, she didn't preside over this, but was she at the trial?
No, she was not at the hearing.
But then you did get the opportunity to interview her just this week.
Yeah, she visited us on Wednesday, July 31st.
Now, when you interview her, what were you allowed to talk about with her with the
she
morals of the
didn't say,
case?
you know,
merits of the case.
Yeah, we didn't start out saying, well, you know, you can only talk to me about this, this, and this. It didn't go that way. We, you know, kind of threw out some questions. I know, having interviewed prosecutors before, that they don't talk about a case while they're in the middle of it, and sometimes they don't talk about cases they're done with either. But in this case, I mean, of course, the questions that people want to know. Hey, what about the second mile? Are they being investigated? I can't talk about that. You know, what about, you know, so-and-so's, well, you know, is Mike McQuarrie a credible witness? I can't comment on, you know, the credibility of a witness. So there were a lot of things like that. I think as journalists, we have to ask them. You never know what people will say, but I think somebody in such a high office as Kathleen Kane, she's polished enough not to let something slip.
Now, when you had the opportunity to sit down with her and discuss this, did she share anything with you that you were surprised that she shared?
I wasn't shocked about anything. I mean, because I think we got out of her what we expected to get out. I mean, she commented a little bit about prosecuting the Curley Schultz Spanier case. She said they're ready to go. But then again, I don't think a prosecutor would say we're not ready to go. And we asked her about the investigation into the Sandusky investigation, and we've asked before, and you know, we've been told we're not talking about this. You know, you'll hear when it's done with, and we're not going to talk about what the timetable is, and we got that same indication. Although one question I asked, I thought was, I don't know if it was interesting or not. It depends on how close you are, I think, or how close you followed it. I asked her if the special prosecutor doing the investigation has used the grand jury. Because we all know that grand juries meet in secret, and you know, you can't talk about that. And she said, I can't tell you. Whereas if she would say no, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to, you know, make any assumptions, but she said, no, I can't tell you if he's used the grand jury. So I don't know if that speaks for itself. I don't know.
In your interview with the Attorney General, did you ask her at all that they would be willing to make a deal with one of the three
Yeah, the interview was with our editor, Chip Mittermeier, publisher, Susan Leith, and another senior reporter, Chris Rosenblum. And Susan Leith, our publisher, actually asked if there were plea deals that could be made, and Kathleen Kane responded, if anybody wants to admit to their guilt, we'd be happy to take them. So she didn't answer it, but I think they'd always welcome a plea deal. And I think that's, we've heard that so-and-so, that so-and-so's trying to flip on the other one, but we haven't, I don't know that there's any truth to that or we'll see that because the cases are very, very complicated and very intertwined.
Let's go into some little bit more detail about the special prosecutor investigating the whole process. Share with us a little bit more about that. I mean, they're really investigating what the Corbett administration as Attorney General did.
Yeah, I think the public opinion is that Tom Corbett slow-walked the investigation, and because he had his eye on the governor's mansion. And so Kathleen Kane made that a campaign promise to look at why it took so long. And so we all, I think, kind of feel that that's where the investigation's headed. But she has a special prosecutor. His name is Jeffrey Moulton, and he investigated Waco for the FBI. That was a number of years ago.
Sure.
So I mean, I think he knows his stuff, and so from what Kathleen Kane told us, he's going to look at every detail and go where they lead, and they'll be finished only when they don't have any more questions.
What has Chip and your publisher put on your shoulders about making this story the priority, and what kind of space are you allotting for it?
Well, I mean, they've given me a lot of latitude to go to Harrisburg and work on these cases. I mean, there were certain days when I was writing about this, certain weeks I was writing about it every day.
Right.
And I think it's slowed down a little bit, but some weeks may be busy, and then others kind of slow down. So it's definitely been a priority. We
have to wrap things up here. Mike, where can they, first of all, tell people where this Center Daily website is, please?
Yeah, it's centerdaily.com.
And you're on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter, Mike Dawson, CDT.
Mike, thank you for being a part of the show. Really appreciate it.
Steve.
Thank you for watching WHVL's For the Record. We hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day. Bye-bye.